Franklin County Commissioners meeting. May 7th, May 14th, 2013. May 14th, 2019, Commissioners meeting.
Okay. Good morning. It is 9 a.m. on our regular Tuesday board meeting. We have a full complement of commissioners this morning. Mr. Johnson, our administrator, and Mr. Milham, our clerk. So if you would join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our first item on the agenda is approval of minutes for April 16 and April 23. Any additions, corrections?
I would like to add an addition to April 16th. I ask the clerk of the board to please note that on the administrative office business that will be added Commissioner Didier brought to discussion before the board on sanctuary counties and cities.
Okay. All right, with that so noted. Any other? Okay, I will go ahead and sign those. And up next is Mike Livingston, Fish and Wildlife, Gray Wolf Management. Morning, Mike.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is this microphone on? Can you hear me? Or should I
Just tap it and see if it's on.
Is it on now?
Yeah, you got to speak pretty close to it.
And because you're facing
Okay.
it might be better.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Commissioners. I appreciate the time that you've allotted for me to give you a quick update on the status of rules in Washington State and a few processes that we're going to be launching this coming fall. My name is Mike Livingston. I'm the Regional Director for our South Central region in Washington State, which includes Franklin, Benton, Yakima, and Kittitas counties. I'm located up in Yakima, and I was a wildlife biologist here in the Tri-Cities for about 9.5 years based out of our Pasco office just over there by King City. So today I just wanted to give you just a snapshot of what's happening with wolves in Washington State. We've been engaged in managing of those critters since about 2008 when the first wolf pack showed up in Okanogan County. We developed a conservation management plan in 2011, which took about 3 years. It was a citizens, stakeholder-driven process. And one of the tools or guides that we developed was a recovery map that shows 3 different zones in the state of Washington, including eastern Washington, the North Cascades, southern Cascades, and Northwest Coast. This is an important map, and there'll be some more coming up that I want to just highlight. One of the things that we've experienced in the last 10 to 11 years is really rapid wolf recovery in Washington State. They've been moving in from Canada, Idaho, and most recently from Oregon into the Blue Mountains. We've had a growth rate of about 28% per year, which is pretty rapid. Most of the wolves, as you notice on the map, are, at least our identified packs, are in northeast Washington, north of Spokane. And there's been quite a bit of work going on there, but we also have 5 packs in our North Cascades zone, including probably the nearest one in this region would be the Teanaway pack and a new one called the Nanum pack just north of Ellensburg. So when we determine how many wolves are out on the landscape, we do a variety of techniques. We actually capture wolves. We put radio GPS collars on them. We also do aerial surveys, and we have biologists on the ground that are doing tracking surveys where they can estimate number of wolves. We right now, as of 2018, just this past year, estimated we have about 126 wolves in the state of Washington. that's a minimum count. There's wolves that move around. They're highly mobile, so they really can be in other places that we just haven't been able to keep track of yet. But we can pretty confidently say there's at least 126 wolves across the state of Washington. Another population unit that we track in addition to total number are wolf packs. And this is one or two more wolves that are moving in a more localized area that we can kind of pin down their location and identify where their home range may be. We have a couple new packs. One is in Kittitas County, and then there's also the first pack that we've identified west of the Cascade Crest up in the Skagit country in western Washington. Most of them, again, though, however, are in the northeastern Washington and then some in the Blue Mountains. We have a total of 27 packs identified right now. And the third population unit that we track are successful breeding pairs. These are a male and a female, adult male and a female, that have produced at least one pup that has survived for a few months. And these are the population breeding units that we really keep track of. We try to have at least one individual within each pack radio collared, so we put a lot of effort into keeping track of those for a lot of important reasons, keeping track of where they're going, interactions with livestock, and then just to be able to monitor populations and define where their territories are. We have 15 breeding pairs right now in Washington State that we can identify. Another key piece of this is there's two layers of protection for wolves in Washington State. There's federal protection and then there's state. On the federal side, starting, it was about 4 years ago, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service delisted wolves in the Rocky Mountain area, including eastern Washington. So the dividing line there is Highway 395 to where it meets Highway 17 in Othello, and then Highway 17 all the way up to the Canadian border. And that divides the state into eastern third and then a western two-thirds. In the eastern third, the Department of Fish and Wildlife has full management authority to use all of the possible tools that we could use to prevent livestock damage. And on the other side of that line, it's still federally protected, and we do not have lethal control as a tool. So far, all of the real problem areas that we've had with recovering wolves is in that northeast corner where we've had just so many of them coming in that we've had a number of times where we've had to do some control efforts lethally to try to change the behavior of the pack. And we have a very strict protocol that we've worked out with a stakeholder group when we deploy that protocol, and it is just deployed at a point in time where we have demonstrated or documented that they've preyed on livestock. We will go in and we'll remove an individual and see if that changes behavior. If it doesn't, we'll reassess and then possibly do another one. So we've had to do this on a few packs. We've removed, I mentioned that the population's been growing at about a 28% growth rate per year. We've removed around 2% of the wolves that have gotten into trouble. But one of the main points here is anything west of that line is still federally protected, and we just have non-lethal tools in place. This is important. Note that in March of this year, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service proposed to remove the gray wolf from the endangered and threatened list completely. Based on all available information, they're not meeting the classification of threatened or endangered any longer. So this is out for public review right now. If they delist federally, then Washington State would have full authority to do all of the different management actions that we currently are doing in eastern Washington. So just a few processes that we have coming up that I wanted to alert you to. And I had mentioned to the clerk that we had a meeting coming up June 5th in Kennewick. That's been postponed until September. I don't have the specific date yet. We will notify your office when we have that public meeting. The reason we did that was because we have another process that we're going to be launching at the same time. We decided to roll those in together, and I'll explain that a little bit further here. The first thing that we're working on right now is a periodic status review. The state of Washington, through our Fish and Wildlife Commission and the department, has the authority to list species as state threatened or endangered, so that's separate from the federal process. And wolves currently are state endangered at the rate that they're recovering. We know that eventually they're going to be recovered and no longer need that listing. We're doing a population viability analysis currently to determine what the likelihood of them being sustainable into the long term. And we'll finish that up sometime towards the end of this year. And then we would potentially be bringing a recommendation to our commission at the end of this year or early next year. Regardless of the results of that status, we'll be giving an update to our commission about do we recommend that they stay the same status? Maybe we change them to threatened, or we completely remove them from the state list. In 2018, the state legislature put a proviso on the department's budget instructing us to do a public process through SEPA to determine the feasibility of moving wolves from more populated areas, more wolf-populated areas, to the less populated areas. There's some interest in accelerating the recovery. One of the benchmarks that we have is that we have a good distribution of wolves across the state of Washington. Having them all just packed into the northeast corner of the state doesn't achieve the spatial distribution goals that we're after. So this potential translocation would accelerate recovery by moving them from northeast to the southwest. That initially we were told to have that done by the end of the year. Through this legislation, we were able to get authority to roll that into this next process that we're going to do, which is developing a post-delisting management plan for wolves across the state. We know that wolves are going to recover. We need to be prepared for the current management plan is developed to work within the recovery of wolves, and now we're moving into the next step, which is manage the wolves. And that could include hunting, as like they're doing in Colorado or in Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. So we're going to launch this public scoping process in the fall, and that'll be the same time that we do this translocation review public process. Those two will go hand in hand because translocation is a potential tool that we could use to accelerate delisting. And with that, I'm open for any questions. I really appreciate the time, and we haven't had to deal a whole lot with wolves in Franklin County at this point. We did have a radio-collared wolf a few years ago that moved from Oregon through the Blue Mountains, across the Snake River, and into Franklin County. This was in the wintertime, spent just a few days, and then returned south. So they're around. They've been in Adams County in recent time, and they're in Whitman County too. So I think it's a matter of time before they start moving into this area. Thank you.
Questions?
You made a comment that you've removed.
This thing working? There we go. You made a comment that you've removed about 2% of wolves that have gotten into trouble. So that means that you've identified, out of every 100 you've identified that have gotten into trouble, you've removed 2, or you've removed 2 of the 28% growth, or what?
Yeah, it would be out of the total number that we'd have, about 2% of those have been identified as having, interactions with livestock to the point where we've taken lethal action.
So about 2% of the known population, not 2% of those that have gotten into trouble.
Let me read your
Correct,
quote again.
correct.
You said we've removed about 2% of the wolves that have gotten into trouble.
No, it's the other way around.
Okay.
Yeah,
You've removed
right.
about 2% of the total population.
Yes.
That represents the ones you believe have gotten into trouble.
Correct.
Okay. Any wolves in Franklin County today that you know of?
Not that we know of, no.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm sure there's going to be lots more questions. That's what I want to ask for now.
These quote wolves that got in trouble obviously are interfaced with livestock mainly, I would guess. Is there a buyback program from wildlife to the farmers that are losing these animals?
We have a cooperating project where, and we have some money through the legislature to provide to landowners to help with hazing, range riding. There is compensation if that's been documented, so there is some form of compensation, yes.
Mr. Livingston, I'm a cattle farmer, and I've had some. It's not working. I've got cattle, and I own property down there in Grouse Flats, but I refuse to take my cattle up there because I don't want to be terrorized. There's packs of wolves down there now. It supposedly have moved in from Oregon, but there's been sightings of wolves on the 395 corridor in Connell, 2 wolves, and then there's been sighting of wolves down here in Burbank at the Wallula Junction tree farm, where the manager of that tree farm watched them clear a 6-foot fence, so he knew they weren't dogs. So they're here. We've got elk out on the Hanford Range. We got elk down there in Burbank at that tree farm, so that's an easy kill for them when they go after the calves. But you know, I'm just looking at the paper. They had a great article in here on the wolves, and your new director, how do you say his last name?
Susan?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He mentions in here that he's in favor of delisting the wolves.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was talk that we got new blood as a director, but he worked in the Department of Ecology since 1990, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the Department of Ecology, in their preamble, they say that they worship Mother Earth as a living, breathing organism. And in government, there's supposed to be a separation between church and state, and when you worship something, that's a sign of a religion. So I have a really hard time with the fact that we are not really looking after the stakeholders of the property tax payers, our ranchers, and they're being decimated. We have a couple in the room today, and I know Mr. McIrvin really well, and he's losing approximately 50 to 70 head of cattle a year, and it's all based on the evidence of proving it was a wolf kill. And they're being left out on a lot of these kills because there's no evidence left. The body of the animal's gone. The federal listing, you already stated, if it's removed, Washington State's going to take over on protection. You already stated that there's 126 wolves, but there's only 15 breeding pairs.
Correct.
I find that hard to believe because this is of the animal world, so there's really no gender identification in this world. So I can't believe that there's not more than 15 breeding pairs. I can't. That's hard for me to believe. And up in northern Washington, it was noted that the Profanity Peak Pack was renamed the Sherman Pack and then renamed back to the new Profanity Peak Pack. And this gives them more time. Instead of removing these animals, this is a way to protect them. Is that why the names are being shifted and renamed again?
So I don't work in that area, so I'm not 100% certain, Commissioner. I do believe it's likely that a lot of these breeding pairs and packs are really dynamic, and they change locations and sometimes mates over years. And so it's probably a matter of their changing of locations across the landscape and where they're located.
Okay. Now on your map, I noticed there are no packs in western Washington.
Correct. Other than there's a new pack up in northwestern Washington that we just identified this past winter.
Right, but in the history of Washington State, when we're trying to get back to, I don't know what time frame, there had to be packs in western Washington. Why have we not relocated some of these wolves over into western Washington?
So that's part of the conservation management plan that we developed with the stakeholders back in 2011. Did not have translocation at that time within the state as an approved and agreed upon method. That's what that proviso was that was put on our budget just in 2018 that we were going to be evaluating this fall.
I would really suggest that we get some movement to wolves to the west side so that the people over there can also have engagement with the wolves like we have in eastern Washington. Okay. Also, would you explain your rider program, your range rider?
Excuse me, Mr. D. You mind if I follow up on that last question?
I do, because I have a range of questions here. You can follow up when I'm finished, please.
Okay.
The range rider program, can you explain that to me? Is the range rider, does he carry a firearm with him in case he happens to see wolves attacking cattle?
Probably some of them do, some of them don't. I think it's up to the individual. If there is permission, if there's a Caught Me Act, and we had that happen recently in Adams County where there was a operator that saw a wolf chasing livestock and they shot him, and that was permissible. So, I think it's up to each of those range riders whether they do or not.
And the last is, do you believe the media is friendly to the wolf relocation or the bringing them back into our society? Do you believe the media is in favor of this?
It depends on where we're talking about in Washington State. As you're aware, we have pretty different viewpoints between eastern Washington and western Washington.
Yes, we do.
So, and we're stuck in the middle of that, balancing the folks who are really advocating for more wolves and those who are feeling the real pain in living within wolf country.
The reason I ask that question is because of word association. And it doesn't really matter which media I'm talking about. In previous years when we had a terrorist attack and it was a single individual, they always referred to that terrorist as a lone wolf. And my question is, why are we putting terrorists in the hills to terrorize our ranchers? This is the word association that the media has went with for years, since I can remember. It's always a lone wolf. And why? Because as terrorists are trying to kill Americans or individuals, so are wolves. And I think the association is well stated by the media, and we are putting terrorists in the hills to terrorize our ranchers and the people that live there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Peck?
I think I'll let Mr. Didier reinforce his own points. I was going to make an observation that supported his line of reasoning there, but I think I'll defer till after the public has had a chance to comment.
All right. We have comment from the audience? Questions?
From the audience.
If I may, sir.
Yeah.
I have a question, but could I give just a little preamble first real quick?
Yeah. Your name, please, for the minutes.
I'm Glenn McEvan, Diamond M Ranch, eastern Washington, in various areas. We had the first cattle killed by wolves, I think it was 1908. From that time, it was escalated to the point where we're losing about 70 head a year. I was real interested when the man said that only 2% of the wolves are bad wolves. The Conservation Northwest said that Len McEvan is personally responsible for killing 20% of the state wolves. If you have 126 wolves in the state, I guess there has been 20% of them killed that have been killing our cattle. But the Fish and Wildlife never does the job completely. that Profanity Peak pack or the Sherman pack or the new Profanity Peak pack, they come in, there's 10, 15 wolves. They will come in and kill one or two and say, didn't we do a good job? Well, this is crazy what they're doing. We have no relief in sight. 10 years ago, I told my fellow cattlemen, I said, in 10 years, this isn't going to be a Dangling problem. This is going to be a statewide problem. So my question, and I would like to retain the mic for a minute, but my question, how did you come up with 2% of the wolves were bad wolves when there's documented so many attacks, so many wolves that we have had killed? How do you come up with 2% only?
That's, and so these are occurring in another region that I don't work, so I just want to...
Say that again, please.
I just want to say that this is occurring in a region that I don't work, so I'm operating off of information that's been provided to me from other people, so just so you know that. And the number is based on what they've documented, actual attacks, and you know the difference between how the department documents through the protocols of a wolf attack compared to what you might be experiencing on the ground and the evidence that's needed, because sometimes it gets pretty messy with other predators mixing in with wolves, and so that's about the best explanation I could provide for you today, sir.
This is why it's so important to have our county sheriff involved, Jim. You're here yet. When our first attack started up north, we'd call the Fish and Wildlife. They'd come in and say, well, it kind of looks like a wolf ate it, but we have no idea what killed it. This went on for hundreds of head of cattle. Finally, anymore, we just call the county sheriff and say, here, we got a cow and the wolves killed. Would you come and investigate? They will call the Fish and Wildlife, and since that time, the Fish and Wildlife has agreed, yeah, the wolves killed it. So, Jim, I would encourage you to be proactive on this thing when the wolves do get in your county. We all realize that Fish and Wildlife is a rogue agency, out of control, with no restraint. They won't even follow their own guidelines. We had 20 head of cattle killed in one area last year. The protocol calls for eliminating the pack. Kelly says he'll do it. They come in and kill one wolf and say, didn't we do a good job? This is a disaster, out of control. Clint was not that far off when he assessed them as domestic terrorists. It is terrible. Franklin County will reap the benefits eventually. They haven't yet. Wyoming has done extensive study. Shows that for every wolf, every depredation they find, there's 7 more they can't find. Those wolves in 24 hours will completely clean up a carcass. The only thing they will leave is the bottom jaw and the switch of the tail. Everything else is just pieces of bone left. This is a disaster we're into, and I might want to address this further, but I will relinquish the mic now, and maybe some of you can comment on some of these things.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, quick question here for our guest. You made reference in talking about the 2011 management plan about the 28% growth rate, about until recently the absence of wolves in the western side of the state. But through that discussion, you made a couple of different references to wolves coming in, and I presume you're talking about coming south out of Canada and north out of Oregon.
And
I'm curious.
Idaho.
And Idaho, okay. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts as to why wolves in British Columbia, the western part, haven't migrated south into western Washington. The climate is certainly hospitable for them. They thrive in Alaska. Certainly they can handle northwest Washington. Mm-hmm. And sort of the underlying premise of my question is, did we start this population explosion in northeast Washington? And if not, why are they coming south into northeast Washington and not into northwest?
It's a good question. I'm not exactly sure why they haven't moved in from British Columbia into western Washington. I think all of us are a bit surprised that they haven't expanded across the state at a more rapid rate than they have. What we're seeing is they're packing into northeastern Washington, filling in all the different territorial space there before expanding into other areas. And this is a process that we haven't observed in Washington State yet, so we're learning as the wolves choose where to go. And there's abundant wolves in Idaho and in Canada just north of northeastern Washington, and that would explain why there's so many packing in there right now. But I can only speculate as to why wolves haven't come into western Washington from the north so far.
And did that 2011 plan speak to possible packs in northwest Washington? Was that actively considered? Was it discussed in terms of translocation?
Translocation was definitely discussed during the development of the plan. At that time, the stakeholder group and then the department, per their guidance, chose not to use translocation as a tool during the period that we've been through so far. And whether we do it in the future is going to be dependent upon this public process that we'll be launching in the fall.
And does the department have an opinion as to whether translocation from northeast Washington to northwest Washington is more or less preferable than simply killing a number of wolves?
It's a really difficult question, because if what we're faced with is, do you pick up and move wolves that are creating problems for one group of operators and potentially create a problem for somebody else? So there's that. Would translocation accelerate their recovery? It could. These are highly mobile individual animals that could move right back to where we brought them from as well. So I think we're going to analyze all those things. Obviously, this is beyond just wolf biology. There's the social, economic considerations here that we'll have to look into, both on the positives of moving them out of the areas where they're super dense, and for those communities that would be receiving them.
Sure. And so I know you're obligated to a public process, and you've already talked about working through SEPA. In any of those public engagements, have you sensed any reluctance or hesitation or resistance from West Side populations, people, to the idea of translocating wolves to western Washington?
My counterparts are in the same process that I am, notifying county commissions, working with other stakeholders. I certainly think there's a lot of questions coming to them on what does it mean to have wolves intentionally moved over to their part of the world. We're still collecting that information, and when the SEPA process gets launched, I'm certain we're going to hear quite a bit of diverse interests, just like we did when we launched the current plan that we're involved in.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I've got additional questions, but I'll defer for a while.
And Mr. Livingston, in just hearing that conversation, when we first started this bringing the wolves back into Washington State, none of the wolves were located here. They all moved in on their own?
Correct.
There was no wolves moved in here from Canada?
No.
And these are Canadian wolves. These aren't the ones that were native to this area, correct? These are bigger wolves, because I've seen pictures of them that are being hunted in Idaho. They're very large animals.
Genetically, the gray wolf is a single species, similar to the ones that are in the Great Lakes states, into Canada, and in the Rocky Mountain states that are here in Washington State.
And you're from Michigan.
Yeah.
I read your bio. You love hunting and fishing, much like all of us. But you got gray wolves there in Michigan then?
In the Upper Peninsula, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So you're well familiar with the wolf and its tendencies. You know they like to kill for sport, and they've been documented as doing that. I have another rancher up north that a pack of wolves came into his sheep herd and killed, I think it was close to 30 plus, and none of them were eaten. They were just on a killing spree. So we know that they love to kill. That's why the media associates them with terrorists. And
How many is enough? What's the goal of Washington State? How many wolves? What's the goal? I mean, that's the thing about all this is numbers. How many is enough? I mean, I think that northeastern Washington has got their fill. And when they delist them, are they going to put a hunting season on them like Idaho has done, where at one tag you can kill 6 wolves?
So that'll be a public process to determine, but certainly when they are delisted federally as well as state, the intent is to ultimately manage them as a game species in Washington State. I can't tell you what the quotas or the size of the harvest will be. It'll be based on total numbers that we have. And then also, as they experienced in Idaho and Montana and Wyoming, is there's a learning experience for hunters. Mm-hmm. It's not initially as easy as initially conceived, but they've been getting better at it.
And I was told by one rancher that he called the Washington State Fish and Game, said that he caught 3 wolves chasing his cattle, and if he had his gun, he was going to shoot all 3 of them. And he was told that he would only be able to shoot 1 of them. Is that correct? If you've got 3 wolves attacking your herd, you only can shoot 1?
That's a good question. I can't give you an answer. I think the protocol would be depending on how close they are and what exactly they're doing compared to the others. I think the likelihood that if you shot 1, excuse me, that deterrence of the other 2 would probably, it would probably occur that they would leave. However, I don't know exactly implementing that protocol, how that would work.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Livingston, I coincidentally lived in the Upper Peninsula for about 8 years.
Oh.
I hunted a lot of deer and bears there with rifles and shotguns and bow hunted, and never saw a wolf, never heard of any wolf encounters. Is the population density there very small, or is it that they just don't have large numbers of calves to feed on?
It's sort of like in Washington. I'm not sure what years you were living there, Commissioner. When I was there, we didn't have wolves other than
60s and 80s.
Yeah, I was there in the 80s, and there wasn't a lot of evidence of them there. They've been expanding since then, and they were never extirpated from Minnesota, and then they kind of expanded out into Wisconsin and eventually into the Upper Peninsula. I don't know what total numbers are right now.
Okay, more Keweenaw Peninsula country. Yeah. We've talked about cattle, but I've heard accounts of wolves, trying to be fair here with my terminology, with the pings in their radio collars suggesting that they've been in the immediate presence of people and possibly even tracking or stalking people. Do you have any evidence of that kind of behavior?
To my knowledge, no. We did have an incident last summer, I believe it was, in Okanagan County, where actually a fisheries biologist was up doing some work. They came up from Utah on the forest up there and ended up inadvertently not being aware that they were near the den and experienced aggressive behavior by the wolves, I think trying to get them out of the proximity to the den, and ultimately that individual climbed up the tree and called on a satellite phone, and then a helicopter came in and pulled her out.
So fisheries biologists are people too. So.
Yeah, certainly. I'm glad you think that.
Yeah. So there's been at least one encounter there that we know of. Have you heard anything about a woman walking or jogging in pings following her path?
Personally, no.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, again, other questions, but I'll defer. I don't want to dominate the time.
Any further questions from the audience?
I personally have, I'm Rocky Mullen, but I personally have questions about your data because I had a confirmed calf attack 2 summers ago, and they were not going to confirm it. It was obvious that, it had a chunk out of the inside of its leg taken out, but yet they would not confirm it. And then the vet showed up just as they were leaving, and she looked at him and said, "Seriously?" She goes, these are canine puncture marks. And she took her syringe and started sticking it in all the canine holes. And then their response was, well, okay, we'll confirm it. Well, that's very deceptive. I mean, that's hard to believe your data when you see something like that. And then again, this last summer, I found a dead cow. Calf missing. The cow had not been dead very long. Fish and Game did come out, and half her ear was torn off. She had bite marks on the inside of her leg. And when we skinned her out, she had abrasions on the top of her neck, all which looked like, to me, defensive wounds. All they could say was, I could tell you what didn't kill it. Well, I'll agree, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a cougar. But something took that cow's calf. If that calf was still alive, he would be standing right next to his dead mother wanting milk. But yet, their response was, we cannot. I can tell you what didn't kill it, it wasn't a wolf kill. And obviously, in my opinion, it was. Coyotes generally don't take down 3-year-old healthy cows. They did not test her for myopathy, which I didn't know we could test her at that point, but now looking back, I wish we would have. The cow can die anywhere from hours to up to 3 days later from an attack such as that. The 3 wolves circling my cattle was a long shot, but I was going to shoot all 3. Then I find out, had I shot more than one, I would have felony charges against me. So how are we as cattle ranchers supposed to know what we can and cannot do to protect our livestock? The morning the 3 wolves were circling my cattle, 6 hours prior to that, 5 miles up the road, the coyotes were howling, and my nephew spotlighted a coyote, and 50 yards over, spotlighted a wolf. Now, there were no cattle in that field. They'd been pulled out the day before. So, because I didn't feel comfortable shooting the wolf and no cattle around. Because, but I did shoot the coyote. The wolf stood there and watched and didn't even flinch or run away. They're not afraid of us. They have no fear. As a rancher, I need to know what my rights are if my cattle are being attacked. It's not fair to me to tell me after the fact. I don't know if you have any answers, but I would sure like to know.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I just want to make sure that I make it clear that I empathize as best I can. I'm not a rancher. I don't have livestock. I do believe what you experience is very stressful. It puts your cows through a lot of stress. The department is held to a standard of implementing these protocols that is the balance act between all of the constituencies across the state. And I hope that as time goes on, we get better at being able to communicate, and so you know what you can do and what you can't do related to protecting your livestock. The protocol and the fact that you could only shoot one of those 3. Again, the details of that I'm not real familiar with. I certainly will become familiar after today and ask some more questions about that. I'm just starting to get into the wolf management world in this region, and certainly, I do try to, again, I'm not saying that I can completely understand what you're going through. From a wildlife management standpoint, we have a charge from, our mandates that are given to us to recover wolves, and it's certainly creating in eastern Washington a lot of conflict. And the sooner we can get them delisted as federal and then spread more evenly across the state, the sooner we can manage them in a holistic way. And in this short term, or I don't know if it's short term, but in this period of time that we're in right now, it's you folks are bearing a lot of the brunt of that.
Well, it's very discouraging. We run all of our cattle on privately owned land, and we calve them out down here in Franklin County, which is an extra added cost to me because I would rather have all my cattle up there now, but I am still holding those back here at calve because I know if I take them up there and release them, chances are my loss will be great. I dropped off a load of cows last night at 9 o'clock and called it for the wolves howling. It's just very, very discouraging. And when I did have the confirmed calf attack, I asked Fish and Game, I said, do I have to bear all the costs involved with this attack? And he says, there's no money available that I'm aware of. And I don't want the money. I want the wolves gone. But I also have a $500 vet bill because of the state's property. So, it's very discouraging. Thank you.
One last thought, Mr. Livington. Would you consider cattle as an asset to forest management?
In the integrated approach to managing all the forests, sure.
Yeah, I do too, because what cattle do is it keeps the fuel load down for that lightning strike or the camper that's not being responsible with a fire. And we're seeing through the last few years that irresponsible forest management leads to catastrophic fires. Mm-hmm. And I just want to remind you that as much as Washington Fish and Wildlife wants to preserve the wolves, fire, it takes everything out in its path. If it's moving fast enough, it'll take everything out into its path. So we really got to be conscientious of the fact that our cattlemen are an asset to forest management, and we need them to run in those hills, and we need that fuel load downsized so that we don't have those catastrophic fires. So we got to really work with our ranchers here. And I think we need to put a quota on the number of wolves in each region, and I think eastern Washington has surpassed its quota. And I think that these wolves either need to be moved to western Washington or they need to be eliminated. Thank you.
Further questions, Mr. Beck?
So, Mr. Livingston, Mr. Mullen asked, I think, some excellent questions. I think any government's got a responsibility when they impose rules and regulations on their citizens to at least provide adequate answers for how a citizen can comply, right? It's the sort of basic element. I'm going to propose that our board compile a list of questions and take any questions that the public has, Mr. McIrvin, Mr. Mullen, anyone else. But what I need to know is, to whom do we send those questions so that we can get clear, written, legally defensible answers so that our citizens know what and when they can do. I know some folks who live up north, and I know without hesitation that if they thought that wolves were threatening people, they'd shoot them on the spot, and I'd join them in the process. And if they were my calves, I'd be really tempted to do what I thought was necessary to protect the livelihood of myself and my family. We put people in an extremely unfair, unethical, untenable position when we levy rules and regulations without explanation. So if you could, maybe before you leave, just with Mr. Johnson or somebody, leave us the name and contact information for the agency that can answer these questions. Not the agency, the individual. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'll just make it simple. I'll give them my card right now, and then I'll relay it out to our specialists, and we'll get the information for you. I really appreciate that. That's a great... I jotted notes down, but this would be really helpful if you provided that.
Well, right. So is there a specific individual that is responsible for articulating these rules as to what Mr. Mullen can do and not do? Is it the director?
Ultimately, the director, yes. We have a wolf policy person, Danny Martorello, which I'm sure some individuals know. On the ground, we have a wolf statewide specialist, and we have a number of conflict specialists. All of those individuals would be familiar with the protocol beyond my knowledge, and I will, contact each of them to get a collective answer for you.
The department has legal counsel, right? You have attorneys?
Yes,
So maybe
Attorney General's office.
Maybe
yeah.
it is the AG's office.
Yes.
You don't have any special deputies assigned specifically to Fish and Wildlife?
The Attorney General's office assigns legal counsel to the department.
Okay. And we're going to want to cast a moderately wide net to make sure that we get all the individuals who are in a position that they ought to be able to answer these. My premise personally is that if the government establishes a rule or regulation and can't articulate to individuals how they can comply, then it creates a very broad interpretation, in my opinion, as to what an individual ought to be permitted to do. If the state isn't going to tell us exactly when, where, and how, then they ought to have the right, the first right of personal defense and property defense. So that's where I'm going.
Other thoughts?
Just a real quick thing. Very few people realize the severity of this thing. We're well over $1 million lost in the last 10 years on our individual ranch. This is serious. This is going to put a lot of cattlemen out of business. I'd like to address relocating wolves. It seems like it's a common thought that if they put wolves on the west side or the area where there aren't wolves, that it will help the Northeast Washington problem. That's wrong. It won't help our problem at all. It'll just give more problems in the area where they don't have problems now. The only reason to translocate wolves is to comply with the ridiculous wolf plan that was devised to put equal number of wolves in the 3 segments of the state. That's the only reason to translocate these wolves. It's not to address our problem in Northeast Washington. Also, I'd like to address the federal delisting of wolves. I have a feeling that if Washington State is totally in charge of the wolf problem, our problems will be much worse than if the federal people had some involvement in it. Just the feds delisting wolves, all our areas already delisted federally. Our problems keep escalating under state control. It's like I said earlier, the Fish and Wildlife Department will not even follow their own rules. They're above the law. They won't comply with what they've already said they would do. So anyway, these 3 points I just wanted to mention, and I guess that we have a lot of problems, and I won't harass you anymore, but I have no respect for the hierarchy of the Fish and Wildlife Department of Washington State. They are completely anti-producer, anti-production. Thank you.
So, Mr. McIrvin, I'll just clarify. My interest in the relocation topic is that as part of my duties as a commissioner, I spend an unfortunate amount of time in Olympia. And the power to fix this problem rests with the state legislature. And unless and until enough voices in the state legislature pay attention to this, it isn't going to get fixed. And if we have wolves in western Washington, my contention is we'll have a whole bunch more legislators interested in fixing this problem.
And I don't disagree with that at all. I just wanted to address the point. So many of our friends and neighbors say if we could translocate these wolves to the west side, it'd sure help us. It won't help at all because we will continue to have more wolves where we're at.
I understand. And I think you understand where I was going.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Good discussion. And looking forward to the contact items. So, thank you, Mike, for your time.
Thank you.
Brings our next item of Derek, hemp moratorium ordinance.
recently it came to staff's attention that there's been some changes regarding hemp production and and the regulation of hemp production in not just the United States, or I mean just Washington State, but also in the nation as a whole. And there's been a recent, as of April 26, 2019, Washington State's recently modified some of the regulations associated with hemp and also changed some of the definitions to clarify the differentials between marijuana and hemp production and changed some of the definitions under the state laws when it comes to this. So this was brought to staff's attention. We started looking, realized that this is a potentially big, new industry. But it's got, at this point, really no regulation or anything associated with it. And the Washington State Department of Agriculture is responsible for implementing, developing new rules on an expedited track with a non-binding due date of June 1, 2019. But it is also possible that they could take longer. Licensing is being potentially put out by the state at this time, but really with no rules associated with it except for guidance from a program that the Department of Agriculture developed. So what is being requested is a 6-month moratorium on the issuance, licensing, or anything like that regarding hemp production to give the county time, and the state, and the USDA, for that matter, time to implement local standards so that this potential product can be in front of the county, or how we, basically so we can sit down and figure out how we want to address it regarding any potential impacts, things like that. What's being requested is 6 months. That would give us time, and hopefully by then the final rules are at least in a draft format so that we can really formulate our policies. One of the things I don't want to do is have potential hemp farmers coming in, spending a lot of time and energy on a facility or something like that then ends up being in conflict with local desires, or in conflict with the new rules as they become finalized. So it's kind of a cooling down period just to make sure that we have our ducks in a row, and hopefully the state and the federal government also gets their stuff finalized associated with that. It's a little different. There's not a big fat packet associated with a staff report. The whereases articulate the preliminary findings of fact for the moratorium. Further work will be done in coordination with staff with an actual formal recommendation at some point in the future. But one of the things that within 60 days of this action, if the moratorium is put in place, we would have a public hearing before the board. In that time, there'd be also further internal coordination and external opportunities for the public to comment, all of that stuff. We will be setting that up for the hearing in that 60-day period. Long and short, and a few things that should be known about hemp. Hemp is a cannabis product. However, it's got a THC level that's less than 0.3% on dry weight. And it's non-hallucinogenic. It doesn't have the THC. The state has now shifted cannabis, both marijuana and hemp are cannabis from the same plant. It's all about the levels of THC in the hemp product. Hemp has a lot of industrial uses, such as making, rope, fabric, those types of products. There's also uses regarding the oil associated with CBD. which is, I don't remember what it is, but you've probably heard about it in the press. It has some pain mitigation. So it's got some medical uses potentially, but the oil also has industrial and homeopathic uses. The point is there's a high potential of it being a new type of crop because it's relatively new to the country. It hasn't been legal in the United States in its raw form for decades, up until 2014. There were times when it became legal and then went away again. But the long and short is that it has the same odor and look as the, say, I-502 or marijuana. So that is some of the concern that staff has to ensure that we don't create conflicts due to the odor or something like that. But it's a new product. It became first legal to, the feds allowed for states to start developing pilot programs in 2014. The state implemented one in 2016 called the Industrial Hemp, I forgot what the R stands for, but program, pilot, research pilot, that's what it was. And that was through the Department of Agriculture, Washington State Department of Agriculture. You get a license, you could do research, they were studying. In 2018, the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018 was adopted at the federal level, allowing states to then transition from a research pilot system to actual full-blown commercial. Hemp is considered a farm product with all the same tax benefits and everything else as any other farm product, whereas marijuana is not. Marijuana is not federally recognized as a legal product. Hemp is federally recognized. There are some issues in transporting across states that have banned it, but that's because each state's doing their own thing. But it's a federally recognized product, and we just want to make sure that if the county decides to move forward with it, that we have done the proper protocols and internal discussions and public discussions to make sure that we're not creating conflicts, or at least minimize them as we can. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Well, Derek, I took the privilege of printing out the history of hemp in America. Mm-hmm. Have you read it?
I've read different stories.
In 1619, it was illegal not to grow it.
Correct. Yep.
That's how valuable this product is.
Yep.
Now, in any time you're setting up an industry like this, time is of the essence. Mm-hmm. We put a 6-month moratorium on this. Other states jump in and lead this. This has the potential to get rid of the plastic problem we have in the world, because plastics can also be made from this. Mm-hmm. By putting you're not going to stop the growth of it, because farmers can raise it today, and it's not going to. You're just stopping the ability for, it says here, no building permit, occupancy permit, or other development permit or approval or business license shall be issued for any purposes or activities set forth above. So if we put this 6-month moratorium on there, there's an opportunity here. We're losing our ability to raise hay here efficiently, because Arizona can get 7 cuttings a year, and they come out with this humidified baler that actually adds moisture as you bale, so they can create dew whenever they want. We're lucky to get 5, probably only going to get 4 this year. Arizona's going to get 7. Our hay market may be on the way out. And so we need something to adapt to.
I agree.
And hemp could be, I don't know if it's going to adapt to this area, but I think it sure likely would with the heat and the water we have. I would hate to see us miss this opportunity, because we put a moratorium on there, and now we're behind the 8 ball when it comes to setting an industry up here in our state.
I don't disagree with that. My concern is that it's a new industry that's very little understood, and part of what my job is to make sure that we have all the the things in place to minimize. Just because we implement a 6-month moratorium does not mean that the moratorium must last 6 months. It's 6 months or until such time as the board has developed rules and regulations to do the thing. So it could be less than that. But for staff, and this is why it's being proposed, it's only to ensure that as we're bringing this industry on, that we have as much minimizing the conflicts. But at the same time, definitely staff sees this as a potential benefit.
So
I would really hate to see it go forward until all the rules and regulations are put forth. Right now, if you don't do this moratorium, you're open to, whatever is going to be grandfathered in. And I don't want to see it grandfathered in. I would rather have us go with our eyes open and with the rules and regulations as they come from the state.
So let me ask you, how many applications for hemp facilities have you received?
I've had one person come in inquiring, and he's actually somebody that I've already requested to, during the public process, come to speak with us.
Excuse me, Derek, you asked how many applications?
Oh, I've received no applications at this point. I had one inquiry.
And this isn't going to be implemented until June 1st, right?
What's that?
This
The moratorium?
Well, no. The ability to raise hemp in the state of Washington won't be put into place until June 1st, correct?
No. What's happening is you can currently apply through the Washington Department's pilot program, and that actually will run until, so everything, any of the existing pilot programs that have already been banked, then they can currently apply for an additional, now licensing too. And anything that's assigned at this point, and I double-checked this because I thought there was really a strange way to do it, but June 1st, those are like almost automatically roll forward. And then there's this window between June 1st and December 31st, 2019, that you can still use the IHERP program methodologies, rules, and regulations and get licensed. And as long as you're licensed before then, you can still roll into that program. So there's this 6-month protocol where the hope by the legislature is that the Department of Agriculture has the rules in place by June 1st. But they can currently petition to the Department of Agriculture to obtain a license and then come into a jurisdiction and request to utilize that license now. And that's why I have a little bit of concern, because you can get your license to move forward, and it's not like they're rogue. They have rules and protocols they have to follow, but they're based on this other program and the processes utilized there that were primarily geared towards research. Well, in fact, that was implicit. You had to be doing research or you couldn't do it. Then you've got this gap of time where they're doing that still, but they're changing the rules, or potentially. They're updating and modifying, and they have a non-binding due date of June 1st, but they could take longer, and that's acknowledged in the Senate bill that we were hoping you're using it. Well, they've been mandated to use the expedited rule-making process. Then they're looking at, hopefully by June 1st, they'll have the rules in place. But like I said, it specifically acknowledges, but if not, then whenever they get them in place. And it's kind of that haziness as to when the final rules are going to be established that are a little disturbing, but there's nothing that I'm aware of that would prohibit us from starting to at least get some basic fundamental aspects in place pending the final regulations as well. So I think there's ways to work it, but I'm not comfortable with, say, word gets out, we're open, and we get this flood of potential
Well, it's been out there for
licensees.
how long, and you haven't even got one application?
Because you couldn't do it except for as part of research.
Okay.
And in part of the pilot project, it's only been since April 26, 2019, that it became legal for commercial, and that's where the concern comes.
Isn't this a state problem instead of our county problem? If they don't have the rules and regs in place, we're putting a moratorium on, but there are no rules and regs in place to even look at. So I think we're putting the cart in front of the horse here.
Well, that's part of why the moratorium's in place, or is being recommended, is to give us that time to see how things are going to settle out. But at the same time, we can put at least at a minimum some minimum requirements,
Like
such
what?
as not in the UGAs. You can't grow it in there, or maybe within proximities, or we may have a desire for buffer zones or things like that. That's the type of things that at least I personally, when I'm looking at it right now, prior to really much public input at this point, but looking at those types of scenarios, not trying to necessarily, well, again, remember, I work for you guys, so you kind of give me the direction you want me to go in. But right now, it's just a matter of if it's a new thing, just came out on the 26th. There are some people that are very well up on it in advanced knowledge and sophisticated regarding this product. A lot of Americans just know it as something hippies wear, and that little thing there, and then other ones just know all about the CBD. But there's a lot there that could be potentially beneficial. Yeah. But I could also see the potential for some conflicts or issues if we don't start implementing things or get things kind of set right, at least the foundations.
So, Derek, regarding Senate Substitute 5726, which is the bill we've been discussing that potentially legalizes commercial production of hemp in Washington. You talked a little bit about the June 1 date. I think everybody realizes that that's wholly unrealistic, and the state won't have their stuff together by then. Right. Probably not even close to then. Is it your reading, your interpretation of 5726 that absent a moratorium, people could start commercial hemp growing, processing, production, retailing in the state?
Yes.
Outside of the pilot program?
No, they had to, at this point,
that's where I was,
part of the
just
pilot
go
program.
with me.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay. And the pilot program only permits it for research.
That was the primary
So my
purpose
question
for it.
was the commercial production, processing, retailing, and you said yes. And I think the answer is no, because the only way it could be legal would be under the pilot program. The pilot program only allows it for research, not for commercialization and retail, which was my question.
No, well, okay, maybe I misspoke then.
Let me just go through it again, because I think it's important. I'll work it the other way around. The pilot program only allows growing for research. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the new bill, the new law, Senate Substitute Bill 5726, would allow for commercial production, so forth, once the state has established rules. I didn't see anything that would allow it prior to the rules being provided.
I guess, and I see what you're saying there, and
so let's just take it a step further. Assuming that that's correct, and we can double back if we need to, then the only way you could do it, you could grow it prior to the rules being provided by the state would be under the pilot program and for research only. It's an important question because it speaks to whether or not there is really an opportunity for commercialization and whether or not we lose ground in the development of an emerging market. And if it's not legal to grow it outside of the pilot program prior to the state adopting rules, then there's really no issue. So the key question is, can someone grow it for other than research purposes prior to the state adopting rules? If they can, I think a moratorium makes sense. If they can't, then I think it's largely irrelevant.
If I may interject, my understanding of Section 1, Paragraph 3, on the first page of that bill answers that question. So
Is it too long to read?
No, it says authorize this. Going back first, the legislature intends to authorize the growing of hemp as a legal agricultural activity in this state. Hemp is an agricultural product that may be legally grown, produced, processed, possessed, transferred, commercially sold, and traded. Hemp and processed hemp produced in accordance with this chapter or produced lawfully under the laws of another state, tribe, or country may be transferred and sold within the state, outside of this state, and internationally. Nothing in this chapter is intended to prevent or restrain commerce in this state involving hemp or hemp products produced lawfully under the laws of another state, tribe, or country.
I don't hear anything in there that speaks to the time. The law says you can do it, but
The prior paragraph, section 1, paragraph 2, speaks to the research program. It says the legislature intends to replace the industrial hemp research program in chapter 15.120 RCW with a new licensing and regulatory program established in this chapter and enable hemp growers licensed under the industrial hemp research program on the effective date of rules implementing this chapter and regulating.
effective date of rules implementing this chapter.
And
Until rules are adopted, I don't think it's legal. Am I misinterpreting that?
It's legal to grow. The moratorium is put on for regarding hemp facilities is what you're putting the moratorium on, correct?
If I can speak to why I have a little bit of angst regarding this.
Derek, if you would, I believe I've still got the floor, and I'd like to drill down on this question. Do we believe that it is legal prior to the implementation of rules?
I do, based
Could
on...
you read that one sentence again, please?
Yeah, the legislature intends to replace the industrial hemp research program in chapter 15.120 with the new licensing and regulatory program established in this chapter and enable hemp growers licensed under the industrial hemp research program on the effective date of rules implementing this chapter and regulating hemp
On the
production.
effective date of rules implementing this chapter. My reading of that is that until the state establishes rules to implement this chapter, it's not legal to do it. And so I think I understand that your intent here is to create a moratorium. And we've already talked about the fact that they're not going to have rules by June 1st, and I'm going to predict they're not going to have them at the earliest until late in the year, if then. We learned from the marijuana experience, which this shouldn't take as long, but it may. But I don't think it's effective until those rules come in. Assuming that I'm correct, do you think that affects our action today?
Well, I would agree. If the interpretation is such that the intent of that language was the fact that basically until the rules of this, but the question being one is when they use that language, are they referring to the effective date of the bill, or are they talking about the effective date of the rules being implemented as ordered or directed through this bill?
Yes, it's the effective date of the rules in plain language. It's very clear. So I'll just say that while I understand why you did it, in the resolution there are 6 or 7 whereases at the very beginning that all speak to marijuana. We'll likely get some pushback from people who have for years tried to educate us in the fact that marijuana and hemp are decidedly different. They're both cannabis, but they're different products. But I don't think it does any harm, so I think it can stay. But I just wanted to offer that feedback, because I think you can expect that. Secondly, I don't think anybody can do anything commercially until, under the law, the state adopts rules. But if they should suddenly adopt rules next month, we don't want to be caught unaware either. We want to be able to take those state rules and develop our own local ones. So I don't think there's a time urgency that it appears, because it doesn't take effect till the state does their rules. And again, I think that's several months away. The issue becomes you do a 6-month moratorium and it takes them 8 months to develop their rules. So we'll likely have to extend this moratorium just like we did with marijuana several times. And there became a legal question about how many times you can extend a moratorium. So let's keep that in the back of our minds. And so in closing, I'd say that I think the resolution potentially unnecessary, but I don't see any direct harm of it. I don't think any of this applies till the state gets their act together, and I think that's enough.
If I may add just a little bit of context, it's somewhat unrelated, but we've seen in other states this discussion, particularly as it relates to law enforcement and the difficulty of officers in the field being able to determine the difference between hemp and a controlled substance like marijuana. There was an 18-wheeler in Idaho that's under legal review, another one in Oklahoma, where they had all the paperwork of a licensed hemp facility transporting it to a processing facility across state lines, but it had not been legalized within those states yet. And so the local law enforcement, not knowing if this is marijuana or hemp, without good lab capability in the field, have to confiscate it, take it to a lab, have it tested. That takes time. It impairs the economic interests of a legal hemp grower. And until different states can get this figured out, it's going to be even difficult for individual states to get this figured out. This was just legalized as an agricultural product in the 2018 Farm Bill last year. It's a relatively new industry in that sense in the United States, because hemp has historically been treated as a controlled substance just like marijuana. It's been discussed for decades. I mean, I think your reference was sometime in the 1600s. Obviously, historically, it was a useful product in commerce and agriculture, but due to the growth of the marijuana industry, that's really stopped commercial growth of hemp in the United States. And they're now recognizing that hemp has many useful capabilities and are trying to return to that. But the regulatory environment of separating out regulation of marijuana and other controlled substances versus hemp and farm products has been a difficult endeavor at the federal and, as we see, at the state level. And we propose this as an opportunity to, I think, really what Commissioner Cook said earlier, was to try to make sure that we didn't grandfather in operators that were trying to skirt the law for controlled substances by using hemp as their defense and having and those legitimate hemp operators having problems and difficulties with law enforcement getting their products to market. We want to make sure that they're operating within the law.
So I think the balance between all those considerations, one, I doubt we're going to have much difficulty with interstate commerce of hemp between Oregon and Washington. Even if you do, you can go down the Washington side. And we're fortunate in this state to have a good market and a good export terminal to go to the Pacific Rim. So there's potential for the market here in Washington to have an economic advantage. And I think we all agree that we don't want to needlessly delay opportunity for an emerging market. And I think the points about grandfathering are equally valid. So I would propose as the appropriate middle ground for us is that we do the moratorium and we instruct staff to immediately begin collecting information from other states who've already been down this road and use them to inform the process of developing some regulatory guidelines for Franklin County based on the assumption that the state will do rules later this summer and what we likely think those rules will be. And sure, there's some guesswork there, but we want to minimize the lag time for our growers to get into this market if they choose to, at the same time take care of the grandfathering issue. So I think the resolution as presented is acceptable with the caveat that we want planning staff to be loaded forward to, spring-loaded to have a set of guidelines for our county and the other issues we're going to have to deal with regardless in terms of local law enforcement.
Sure. Commissioner, you keep referring to it as this is an ordinance, it's not a resolution.
Sorry. Every time I said resolution, I meant ordinance. The record stands corrected.
Yeah.
So, Derek, I have one final question. Mm-hmm. In your recommendation, it says the Planning Department staff recommends imposing a 6-month moratorium regarding hemp facilities.
Correct.
So this has nothing to do with the growing hemp. If somebody wanted to go out there and plant it today, there is no moratorium for growing it, correct?
That's not correct.
No. But facilities is a catch-all phrase for basically any operation that's involving.
You should say cultivation and growing then, and not facilities, because this is misleading.
That's handled under production is usually was that. But I can definitely make that change. That's not
Section 2 of the says the moratorium imposed pursuant to the laws of the state of Washington. A moratorium is hereby imposed prohibiting within all areas of unincorporated Franklin County the establishment, location, operation, licensure, or maintenance of premises, facilities, businesses, or any other activities or operations involving the production, processing, or sales of hemp or industrial hemp authorized by, etc. So it's comprehensive that we would prohibit the production of hemp in unincorporated Franklin County.
So if somebody wanted to experiment and see if it was something that could be, you can't do that this year.
There are some experimental licensures. I spoke with Tim Waters at Washington State University Extension. They have an experimental production research.
So you could apply for that if you wanted to plant and make sure it was going to work in this area.
Test the soil or the...
Well, you just want to test to see if it can cope with the heat that we have in the summer. I'm sure it will, but nobody knows until you try it. And that's where we're going to miss the opportunity is we'll be...
The research can continue under this.
Okay.
It's basically the commercial production of it that would be prohibited until the rules are in place.
Yeah, the pilot programs are currently legal, and they can do that research. And I'm quite certain that if WSU applied to the state to do research on it, that the state would be anxious to take them in.
It would be my hope that this moratorium would be as short a period as possible because of basically which
and that's why I was saying we're just spring-loaded to developing regulations based on what we anticipate is coming so that when we get the state rules, we can adjust ours as necessary and be ready to go.
Because we do have the benefit of this being a farm county, so right to farm. The expectations here are, shall we say, different than, say, some other counties that are more urbanized, and some of the potential impacts from it of odor and things like that are more...
That reminds me of Benton County got into an odor problem with not having enough separation. That's just one of the items that need to be looked at. And give us time to do that.
But I will,
So, Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, I'll move for approval of ordinance number 02-2019 entitled an ordinance imposing a 6-month moratorium on the establishment, location, permitting, licensing, or operation of hemp or industrial hemp production, processing, or wholesale retail facilities in Franklin County, Washington, and directing the scheduling of a public hearing, or in other words, as presented, and looking for a second and happy to have as much discussion as anybody wants, but my comments are already in.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to amend that motion to the fact that as soon as the rules come out of Olympia, that we adapt as soon as possible and cut short the 6-month moratorium to the shortest length of time.
So, Mr. Chairman, as the maker of the motion, I'm not inclined to accept a proposed amendment because we've given direction to staff. It's on the record, and I think it's best that the ordinance stay focused on the moratorium issues and not encumber it with any potential legal challenges of language as we've seen with previous moratoriums.
You second it?
You can, Bob.
Okay. I will second. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. With that, we are at our item on the agenda for public comment. Do we have somebody that'd like to address the board? Richard?
Good morning, gentlemen. My name's Dick Shireman. I direct the Franklin County Historical Society. I'm just commencing my first year as director of the group, and I'm happy to be here to pass on our thanks for your support in times past of our heritage endeavors. We have several hundred very devoted members. We hosted some 2,500 tourists last year at the museum, and happy to report that even here earlier in the year, our numbers are ahead of last year. A momentary insert with all the controversial issues here from wolves to hemp. This is the 100th anniversary of the publication of Zane Grey's novel, War in the Big Bend, which was about the proposed socialist wobbly takeover of the Pacific Northwest. So good for you for considering lots of tough issues. I'm here to say thanks. A couple of years ago, you awarded us a Heritage Grant to organize our archives. We're commencing our 51st year of our society, and we had probably in the neighborhood of 40 cubic feet of documents. Had somebody come and said, what do you have on Altopia? What do you have on the Wobblies? What do you have on Ringgold? We could have said, well, there's something over there, but we're not sure what. And thanks to your good help, we have completed that. And just this past month, we have accepted the Washington State Railroad Heritage Society archive, which is larger than what we've had before. So we have an enormous task. It's an exciting task. And living here in what I call the 1,000 square mile living history museum of Franklin County, it's an exciting prospect for us. Wanted to share with you that we're also excited about an upcoming capital campaign. As you know from previous visits, we have a storage problem. We're in the good graces of the police station and other places around the community, actually, where we're storing things. And we're grateful for our partnership with you. As the owners of the building, we recognize that's a significant responsibility for you. We have no taxing authority as the Museum Society. We operate on a tight budget, but we're proud of what we can do, and we want to reach out to you in ways that in the future we might partner through fundraising like the capital campaign, because there will be issues like stucco repair or drywall. Right now, thanks to your support, considering the replacement of the front steps, which of course is a big aspect of first impression. So thank you for what you've done. We look forward to these communications in the future. June 1st, we've got the Grand John Mullen Trail Field Trip Extravaganza, and invite you to participate if you don't have anything going. I think, Bob, you signed up. Great for that. And Franklin County, what a place to see not only these things today of such great relevance, but go see the tracks where John Mullen surveyed these trails that go back over 100 years. Not too many places in America you can see this. So we want to celebrate that with you, and once again say thanks. I'll leave literature on that opportunity for June 1st here on the table if any of you want to take advantage of it. And thanks again. We look forward to further communication with you about these things. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard. With that, we'll move on. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to warrants and payroll.
Mr. Chairman, we've got one financial matter to attend to this morning. It's fund expenditures. I move for approval of fund expenditures as presented in a total amount of $71,850.15. Note for the record, this has been reviewed and signed by the county administrator and 2 members of the county auditor's office.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I think that's the least I've heard of on any of the warrants for a long time.
It is.
Moving right along to the consent agenda. We have consent agenda 1 through 7 this morning.
And, Mr. Chairman, move for approval of the consent agenda as presented. Happy to entertain any discussion.
I second with discussion on item 6.
Okay. Discussion?
Mr. Chairman, on item 6, we are looking here at shifting money from our cumulative fund to the road department fund. And if I may ask Matt Mahoney to please come up and join us. Mr. Mahoney, I got to ask you how you feel about this. We shifted $1.7 million from the road fund, and in this document here, we're going to loan you money from the cumulative fund with an interest rate. I don't think you're getting any interest rate on the 1.7, are you? I don't know how we can charge you interest to fulfill your obligations when we took money away from you. How do you feel about it?
Well, I think certainly if there was a way that we could get out of paying interest, we would do it. Unfortunately, because the cumulative fund, the money that's in there, of course, the Board of County Commissioners, according to statutes, can transfer money into the county road fund, but even Tim with the county auditor's office did an evaluation as well, and I agree with his evaluation that transferring money into the county road fund, once it's intermingled with the motor vehicle fuel tax, has the constitutional and statutory protections. Therefore, it's necessary for it to be observed as loans, and we look at this as being could be multiple loans of different amounts at any given time just for cash flow purposes. So certainly I would like not to have to pay interest, but in this case I think it's important. And it's not just the interest alone, it's just the process of calculating interest, because we may be talking about very short periods of time. You know, one of our big things is, this is really for cash flow purposes, is when money comes in compared to when as it goes out. So it's really a timing issue for us. We're still managing the budget that was approved by the board, and certainly believe this isn't a budgetary crisis, just really a cash flow crisis at this point.
Again, you just stated it. You don't know when we will get reimbursed from the grants that we participated with, so it depends on when they fulfill their obligation of paying the grant, and until then you're going to be paying interest back to the cumulative fund on funds that should be in your road department fund, that should not be transferred or shifted, as they say. So I'm just stating the fact that we are putting our road administration in a bind with these maneuvers in the courthouse. And in my short term as a commissioner, I know that through WASAC, our two main responsibilities are roads and our law enforcement. And I see our roads out there laboring hard. And you and I have talked. I know you'd like to do more preservation of the roads, and preservation means that when you put down new blacktop, that you go back in and you add oil and you add rock and you preserve it by making it stronger, and you're not able to do that for the last how many years?
You know, it's been an ongoing battle probably for the last, I would say, 20 to 25 years. I mean,
Statewide. Not just Franklin County.
Yeah, it is a statewide issue. You know, usually the plan was to chip seal roads every 7 years. That was increased to 10 years, and certainly we're looking at even increasing that out a little farther. But in the middle of that, we're always looking at ways to do things better and at less cost to the taxpayer. So, you know, but yes, it all, as we all know, it all takes money, and running the county is no exception to that. So we all have, it's tough for all of us. So, but like I said, my job is to manage the budget that the board approves, and I'm proud to do that on behalf of the county, and I accept the challenge, whatever it may be. And this is another one of those challenges. It's tough for me to come to the board on when we have these types of things. It really is. But in this case, we can't choose not to pay certain people because we're waiting for revenue to come in. We could have
We have funded projects that are fully funded, but we have to make payment the way the rules are with the grant funding that we have with FHWA and the other federal agencies, is we're supposed to make payment to the contractors prior to getting reimbursement. So there is and let me restate that. We have to submit for payment to the contractors prior to submitting. So we could actually receive the reimbursement on grants prior to actually the voucher or the check being cut, but certainly we can't submit for reimbursement prior to submitting for payment there. And so there's just these delays. If you have $1 million going out and it's going to the different contracts that we have going on, and you don't have $1 million sitting in the bank to make those payments until a week, 2 weeks later, until you get reimbursed from the federal agency, it certainly impacts all of our activities.
We don't have $1 million out there because you're only going to be able to borrow $750,000. So I wouldn't even fill that obligation if that was. And I would like to add that you are doing a remarkable job with the limited resources that we're giving you. So I got to give you kudos and a heads up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, it appears that once again we've conflated multiple topics here. The road shift is one distinct issue in discussion, and the matter before us today is wholly different. What we're talking about today is cash flow, loaning money under the statute, which requires by law the paying of interest to Public Works so that they can pay expenses in anticipation of receiving reimbursement. There's no correlation between the road shift and that. So let's talk about the road shift for a minute since it's been brought up. Excuse me, at 1.7, we could avoid the necessity to do away with the road shift by cutting expenditures in the county. I think that's a good thing for us to look at. The opinions vary on how we do that. Cut 10% of the workforce, cut the sheriff's salary and a bunch of other folks. Of course, that's not going to get us to 1.7 million. That's a big number. The reality is the root cause analysis would tell you that the real problem here is that the state legislature keeps putting obligations on the county which they either don't fund or they underfund, and that forces us into a situation where we've got to find resources to carry out those directions under state law from the state legislature. And very craftily, the state legislature, instead of giving us money, just gave us approval to take it from the road fund. And that's really the problem. And to solve it, we've got to develop the backbone necessary to make cuts that we can do without undue adverse effect on our citizens, and the backbone to say no to the legislature and stop funding a lot of the things that they put on us. Because until we do that, we're going to continue to be in the same boat. The road shift is going to get bigger, as it is in most counties, or many counties, not most. Our roads are going to suffer. Our citizens will suffer. And at the end of the day, this isn't about the road shift. It's about the legislature and unfunded mandates. So appreciate the time. I'll get off my soapbox.
Mr. Mahoney, if we didn't shift $1.7 million, would you be in here asking for a loan?
Well, that's a great question, and the answer to that would be probably not. But I will say that, the tax revenue, the property tax, because that's what we're really talking about, is a shifting of levy capacity from one taxing authority to another. We still, even if you look at it just using round numbers, 3.1 million or 3 million, let's say, and typically we get 60% of that revenue for property tax in April, with the rest of the 40% being received in. And so based on that, if you say 60% of 3 million and then you take the 60% of the 1.7, really that's the difference that we would be talking about.
Forgive me, Matt, but the reality is you would be in here because you'd be spending the 1.7 on the roads where it needs to be spent.
Yeah.
And then you'd be in here saying, we need this for cash flow, and that would be the right answer.
Yeah, I think we would probably still, I think we would still be here. It may not be, I don't believe it would be the 750. I believe it would be, we would be capping it off at some lesser amount. The problem that we have right now really is we worked really hard with the board through the budgeting process to really work on building a really a surplus kind of within the county road department, which unfortunately, as you saw in the packet, that in 2017, our beginning fund balance, we built up to $2.1 million. And then we had, as we know, the spring runoff event in 2018. Of course, that then our beginning fund balance, we were still right about 1.9, but we were still suffering the effects of that 2017, and then the winter we had in 2019. So just between when you look at just the event in 2017, based on the work that we did, the cost, and what we got reimbursed for, and that's really a number showing what we submitted and what we got reimbursed for, is a difference of approximately $700,000 that has impacted that surplus that we were able to build up. We know that in our budget we have to have a minimum of $800,000 to $1 million of cash carryover just to maintain cash flow, but then that doesn't account for any major events that would come up. Right now, with the winter event we had in 2019, we've overspent our budget. And the way we build our budget for snow and ice removal is really 2 times of the year, because we do have activities. So we've already spent our budget in the first part of the year. And there's no budget left for if we get any sort of weather event in October, November, December of this year. So it's a combination of a lot of things. Like I said, my job is to manage based on the budget you folks approve, and certainly we all would like to say, we need more money, and that's to do the operations that we all want to do, and that's throughout the county. But at the end of the day, we've just kind of had the perfect storm the last couple, 3 years that it's all just kind of come together. And it's just put us in a position. At the end of the year, I do believe we're going to be healthy again. This is just to kind of get us through. We do have some major activities coming up along with our projects, and that's our chip seal program. We still want to do some gravel replacement, and we have our crack seal, which is another preservation item that is on the consent agenda today. So we do have a lot at this time of year, especially moving into the third quarter, is where we see our highest expenditures from the county road department. So the answer is yes, I would probably be here, but it may be asking for a lower cap on what we would need.
Yes, and on that chip seal that you mentioned, I did notice that the bid proposals for correctness and accuracy and determine the lowest response bidder is Stripe-Rite. So again, we took the lowest bid for that, and that was brought up last year. And Matt, I got to tell you, we are on limited resources here in Franklin County, and that's why last meeting I was so adamant about increasing salaries at this time. And again, there's avenues to get money other than what Commissioner Peck has stated, and that is the fact that we still have this, we have close to $1 million worth of revenue that's been used for this entitlement for our benefits package, in benefits package. That's close to $1 million that we're looking at here in this benefits package that we're using when people have opted out of our insurance plan and are receiving it in salary, some of them are also taking it in a VBID account. Benton County, again, there's counties surrounding us. When you opt out, you're out. There's funds there that could be used. So there are avenues here that we need to look at to put them back into the county for our two main priorities, and that is roads and law enforcement. Thank you.
I don't think Benton County can opt out. I think it's 100% participation.
It is, and it pays more.
So anyway, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Keith, please.
Yes, just kind of a FYI at this point, no official action necessary. Last evening in Richland, Representative Dan Newhouse held a titled a listening session regarding the future of the lower Snake River dams. Wide group of attendees from around the region participated in that event. As you well know, our County Board of Commissioners is on record of supporting the retention of those dams for the economic interests of the Pacific Northwest region, particularly Franklin County and eastern Washington. About 2 weeks ago at a conference in Boise, Idaho, Idaho's 2nd District Congressman Mike Simpson made a comment in his speech regarding the idea that removing the dams for salmon recovery may need to be on the table as a discussion item to come to a regional solution, and that obviously has been met with a lot of disagreement amongst Eastern Washington interests, particularly the irrigator community, but also electric production folks, everybody that's in agriculture, everybody that's interested in the purpose of those dams. So there wasn't any decision reached last night at the meeting. I wanted you to be aware that I attended. I did not speak or participate in that regard as a representative of Franklin County, but was there mostly as an observer, listening to the comments of both sides of some of that argument. Michelle Andrus, who has been before this board a couple of times, proposing on behalf of the Columbia Snake River Irrigators Association to press the Trump administration and Department of Interior and other federal agencies to move forward with an ESA exemption process, casually known as the God Squad. It's a group of secretaries and administration representatives who would essentially develop the biological opinion independent of the one that's currently in process under the Endangered Species Act. And so Representative Newhouse, his response to the question that was asked on that issue by Gene Reichman was that the God Squad process is not a likely political path forward. There's just not enough political support to carry that. However, he did say he was open to the idea. He was willing to have discussions and willing to request meetings with federal representatives of those agencies and the administration to see if that's a possibility, but his assessment, at least at the outset, was that that's probably not a likely path forward. One thing that was clear, that it took congressional action to build the dams. It would take congressional action to remove them or to bypass them in some way. And so there's going to continue to be public discussions held on that issue. But I wanted you to be aware that those discussions are continuing, and look for any input you have individually or collectively of how we might better position ourselves without misspending political capital, but at the same time being influential on an issue that is of national interest, but certainly very important, critical local interest to Franklin County farmers and ratepayers.
When Michelle questioned Representative Newhouse, did she ask him why he and Kathy McMorris Rogers have not met with the Department of Interior yet?
Yes, she didn't really ask him in that way. She asked, she made mention that had not happened and reiterated her request that happened. He indicated he'd be willing and open to holding those discussions, but there wasn't a conclusive answer that this will be done by this date and time.
Anything else, Keith?
I think that's all I have this morning.
Anything else, Commissioners, for the good of the board? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I needed an executive session.
I'm sorry?
I needed an executive session.
Oh, okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, just for the record, I recognize you adjourned the meeting, but majority of the board, we can reconvene. I don't think there's a...
Yeah, I wasn't aware of.
I was waiting for Mr. Jones to ask.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, we did.
Do you want to share with us litigation?
I can request that. Mr. Chairman, we would request an executive session with the board and legal counsel under RCW 42.30.110, paragraph 1, subparagraph I, to discuss with legal counsel litigation or potential litigation.
And I understand that's up to 20 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to ask the sheriff and Ms. May to say it.
I'd like to ask Jen Johnson, myself, Sheriff, and HR Director Carla Nave to be able to participate. Up to 20 minutes.
All right, we're back in regular session with, after the executive session with no decisions made. Again, I'll ask anything further from the Commissioners. Keith, Karen? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.